Welcome to The Screen Queen, the show where I'll be talking about your favorite TV show or your favorite movie. You'll just have to listen to find out. This is your host, Samantha Parrish. Hello there, and welcome back to the show with the scares that care. This is the Halloween series on The Screen Queen, and I am your host, Samantha Parrish. Well, here we are. It is the final episode of the Halloween series on The Screen Queen for 2023. And before I get into the episode, I just wanted to get personal for a hot second. So, there are people that have seen the news that my grandfather was recently diagnosed with skin cancer. The news that we've gotten from the doctors has been comforting, that he's not really in major danger. Nothing like, oh, you better call the relatives to come on home because things are getting bad. He is a very healthy man, and the doctors have told him that he has a good chance. And so we're just going to take things like bit by bit and day by day and see what happens. So even though cancer is a heavy 6-letter word that I was told, things have gotten a little bit easier to get into this new chapter for my grandfather's life. And he's doing good. And I appreciate those that have reached out to me to ask like how he's doing and how I'm doing. It means a lot to me. And it really just helped out a lot for those that understood that I had to take the time away from the show to take care of myself. So thank you so much for everyone out there that has understood and has given me so much of their love and care and concern. So with that said, now on to the episode. When I was thinking about what I wanted to do for the finale of the Halloween series, it was a hard choice. I'm not gonna lie. There were many ideas that I had, and it makes me glad that I have a lotto system that helps choose the selection for me. But I wanted something to parallel a part of horror history to make this a truly interesting finale. So there's a certain famous film that recently just had a sequel that has been said to retcon the other sequels. You know damn well I'm going to talk about Exorcist 3 because that thing did not deserve to be retconned. With the recent news about Exorcist Believer, it's been heavy on my mind that the film has been coined as the film that will retcon the other Exorcist films. And the first thing I thought is, why would you want to retcon Exorcist 3? Now, to be fair, the Exorcist series has not really had the best history of sequels. When people think about The Exorcist, no one mentions the sequels, because how do you beat the phenomenal impact of The Exorcist that not even a majority of the sequels could still follow its predecessor? That is impressive. Even other directors have tried to follow the coattails, and you can only try to get your pinky on like the cloak of terror that The Exorcist gave to deliver a story to an audience about a little girl that has been possessed by a powerful demon, and it's up to 2 priests to save this little girl. And that alone should just be a standalone film, but then we had sequels. We had The Heretic, which did not do justice at all. Then there was Exorcist 3. And when that came out, people weren't sure how they felt about it. It took a little bit of time for me to get into the film. Then there was the 4th film that I honestly do not remember, and a majority of people don't. Then there was a TV series, and then we had this garbage called Exorcist Believer that was trying to be too big for its britches to say, I'm going to basically erase everything that happened. But there's no way you can erase Exorcist 3. Now that I've seen Exorcist 3, I definitely can see why people hold a torch to this film that is deep down submerged into so many different horror films, whether they're sequels or standalones, and this film in recent years has been given the proper flowers, but in my opinion, this film should be given a flower shop for how good it is. But in order for this film to be given the proper flower shop, I do have to say it does take a couple of watches to really see why this film is a gem. I've had to go back and watch this film several times, and I've found things I never saw before. I have to remind myself that this is a film that's following a story about a girl possessed by a demon named Pazuzu, and then following suit with a detective that is on the hunt for a killer that has been supposedly dead for 15 years, and somehow The Exorcist is in there. It almost feels a little bit strange to call it The Exorcist, where you're kind of wondering, well, how does that come together? And believe me, it does make the title. It absolutely makes the title. This film gives you so much information, and it's sprinkled in at the right amount, so that way it does feel like a valid sequel to the very famous film. With the passing of William Peter Blatty, I feel like it's time to give this guy the proper flowers that he deserves, that he gave us 2 amazing horror films, and what a better way to end the Halloween series with Exorcist 3. So, when we think about horror films, all that's really there is the fear factor. But there are some films that do have a specific theme that really does help the film go through, that you really are immersed into this world. If we think about something like Psycho, okay, all it's all about is just madness. But I want to give Alien a specific example. Alien really built up the relationships you had with the characters when you saw Ripley with the other characters and how she was getting close with a majority of them, and you rarely think about the emotion driven behind what you're going to be fearing for these characters. And I would say The Exorcist has the same thing. In the first film, you have a little girl that has been possessed by a evilness. You watch this little girl have her life flipped upside down as she's no longer in control of her body, and there are so many people that are trying to save this little girl. And I would say the emotion is installed into the third installment. The second film, nope, not there. Nada, nil, zilch. Exorcist 3 has the exact emotion that you got from the first film, with the fact that you are following a police lieutenant named William Kinderman. It is a different cry for the fact that you're not following the main characters that you had from the other films. There is no Reagan, there's no Chris, obviously there's no Father Marin. We're following a police lieutenant that is tracking down a killer that is going after priests and other altar boys. Anything associated with religion, everyone has a giant target on their back that if you believe in God, you are targeted. And it's believed to be the Gemini Killer. However, the Gemini Killer has been dead for 15 years. How does a man that's been dead for 15 years go around killing people? It's a far cry to make that evidence be supported. But a little bit more of the backstory is delivered. You're given different plot points to this film that feels like it's come full circle. You're not given points that you feel did not deliver. William Kinderman was the best friend of Father Karras, which beautifully carries into the film that we get to learn more about these characters. It's like I mentioned in my History of Rambo episode that the character Colonel Traubman was the only guy that could be able to give us information about Rambo, since Rambo is essentially like a solo character movie. We have to rely upon outside sources about who's going to be talking about the main character. Kinderman gives us a little bit more of Father Karras, and it is beautifully portrayed by Geroge C. Scott, who I never penned would be in a horror film. Geroge C. Scott gives so much of this film. This is the guy that played General Patton, guys. I knew going this film that I was going to hang on to my seat because I knew my TV was going to explode right in front of me. It is the perfect cast that they have chosen for this film. Everyone is casted to perfection. It is a wonderful way to carry on a film by having people that can come to the plate and bring the story to life. Because again, like I said, there's a lot of emotion driven into here, and why not have it be driven by a guy who knows how to drive emotions? The pacing of Exorcist 3 is the same pace from the original film. I remember watching The Exorcist And I'm sitting there like, this is taking like 40 minutes for this film to properly exorcist what's going on here. And after a couple of years, I had to realize that I need that information before shit hits the fan. I love a horror film that will lull you into a sense of security, but also keeping in mind that things are not going to be so sweet soon. You're going to wish it went back to being sweet. When we see Reagan and her mother, Chris, just, being all sweet and playful, and it just gives you just butterflies, like, oh, life is perfect, and then it's not so fast, and then you have a little girl spinning her head around and just saying your mother sucks cocks in hell. Whoo! Goes to 0 to 100. And then with The Exorcist 3, it does take a while until we find out where in the world is this going. But you're intrigued enough to keep going with the film, knowing that this is the guy who is best friends with Father Karras. And there's something that has to do with Father Karras. There's been some mentions and some nods. There's even a little cameo where we see Father Karras in a psychiatric facility, but he's in the dark to make you wonder, is it really him or is it not him? It's in the same realm of The Exorcist where you really have to watch to find out. So I need to take the time to talk about the cast. I just need a solid 5 minutes to talk about how perfect this cast is. And I will always talk about how perfect a cast is. But I've never seen one in a horror film as perfect as Exorcist 3. Again, I'm giving flowers to something that has to be given a flower shop. And honestly, the cast is the driving force behind the film. Everything in this film works solely because of what everyone puts into this to give you a emotional or terrifying feel. The fact that we have Geroge C Scott in the film, who always brings 100%, brings so much emotion, and doesn't make this like any other detective you've ever seen. Kinderman doesn't feel like other detectives or lieutenants that you see in other stories. There are so many procedural characters that are, oh, I need evidence, and I'm going to believe the evidence, and I'm not going to be swayed by things like spiritual stuff, which is ironic considering his character is an atheist, so you know from the get-go, oh yeah, this guy's not going to believe in anything. But because he has such a heart for the crimes that are going on, where he says, how can things exist in this world by a God that will allow cancer and murderers to walk the street? He does deliver something that is set in the tone of what someone without any spiritual form in their life would say. I've heard atheists say that. Someone can't be wrong if that is something presented. That's been the number one thing, but he brings it to a way that it is very self-evident. You can't take away his opinion. And the fact that he's best friends with Priest is kind of ironic, but also you see into his character that he might not believe in God, but he does believe in good people, which is why he's always been friends with Father Karras and the other father that is in the film. Now, with that said, Kinderman is the character that you're spending a majority of your time with in this film compared to The Exorcist, where you spent time with 4 characters. Even though it was about a little girl possessed by a demon, it's up to 2 priests to save the day, you do get time with other characters to get to know them. You're just with Kinderman, which that can be a good thing or a bad thing, but because it's Geroge C. Scott, it's a great thing. Geroge C. Scott does have such a powerful presence that it does take the extra room for not having 3 other characters to bounce off from. But with the inclusion of the return of Father Karras, played by Jason Miller, I really was surprised that he came back. We look at some horror films and we're excited when someone comes back to the film, but there might be something going on as to the reasons why they completely leave a project that's going to look like a barren hole of, wait a minute, this movie was about you. why would you leave something and disrupt the continuity? Well, there's a reason why his ass didn't show up in the second film, for the fact that his character died at the very end of the film. However, Jason Miller was put through hell. Everyone was put through hell, but there is a specific thing that happened to him in the first Exorcist where the famous green vomit scene that happened, that's been portrayed, parodied, Jason Miller wasn't told at all. So their reaction to The Exorcist is real. It wouldn't surprise me if he was like, yeah, I never want to come back to this franchise ever again. If someone threw pea soup in my face and didn't tell me, I'd be impressed at them, but then I'm also going to be like, yeah, I'm not coming back. No, I don't like things thrown in my face. There legitimately are actors out there that are like, hey, my bubble got popped, I'm not going to have my boundaries violated, I'm out of here. Like, back then, we didn't really respect their decision until now. And I guess 15 years was enough time for him to go, okay, as long as you don't throw pea soup in my face, I should be fine. Because, damn, I'm really glad that his presence is in this film. It really did save the whole franchise, on top of this being the more improved sequel than the previous. And it's all thanks to the fact that the angle goes back to him. There are amazing heavy hitters in this film, from Scott Wilson in this film, Brad Dourif, and a surprise cameo from a then unknown Samuel L. Jackson. So this was like a blink and you miss it. It took me a couple times to find him in this film, but around the scene where Kinderman is having a dream about the victims of the Gemini Killer, there is a blind man that is just cantering on, and if you get a good look at him, it's Samuel L. Jackson. And I'm like, of course Samuel L. Jackson would be in that dream. It would be weird if Samuel L. Jackson wasn't in someone's dreams. But there is a interesting piece of trivia that I do want to share about Jason Miller in the film. Even though he is forever going to be known as Father Karras in the film, I do find it so ironic that his son, Jason Patrick, would also be in another certain famous horror film called The Lost Boys. So every time I watch The Lost Boys, and I'm just like, oh, your daddy's going to be so proud of you. It's a very interesting hop, skip, and a jump to see, like, certain children of actors and what they still do in the business. But that's pretty powerful that the legacy of father and son is in two prominent parts of the whole universe of horror films. Even though it would have been cool if Jason Patrick did show up into one of the Exorcist films, thankfully not Exorcist Believer, but I like that there's still a nod to that every time I watch The Exorcist or The Lost Boys, I think about, like, oh, that's pretty cool that both of them have their part to play in horror films. But there is someone that has played a part in many horror films that I'm about to talk about, and personally, Brad Dourif is, like, the best part of this whole fucking movie, and here's why. Brad Dourif has been such a mainstay of the horror genre that I have officially lost count how many horror films he's been in. The man does do a great job in many other parts of the art of cinema. Like, this man, oh, as much as I hate the fact that he's known for Chucky, it kills me that he's not known for The Exorcist 3, because holy shit! Every time I watch him in this film, my TV almost breaks. I knew that he was in this film, but I wasn't sure when he was going to come in, so when they have the transition of the demon turning into the deceased Gemini Killer that Brad Dourif plays, oh my god! I was not prepared for it. The zooming of the eyes and him saying, no, I'm not, I'm alive! And I was like, oh, I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready for this. Like, oh man, it's just, I go speechless for how much I appreciate him being in this movie. He's not even in this film long enough but I remember him in the film. This is like the same realm of when you watch Anthony Hopkins in The Silence of the Lambs. The man is only in that film for 29 minutes, and Brad Dourif playing the deceased killer in this film is so powerful that it makes up for him being in the film for just a short amount of time. He makes every moment count. He gives so much into this killer that it is one of the top tier villains I've ever seen, even though he's not the main villain. He is just a decoy. He's still part of the whole charade and the ruse of what the demon is doing to mess with Kinderman. But the fact that he chooses a killer that is in the same realm of this guy that plays with his food, that's the kind of killer that we're seeing on screen that Brad Dourif is bringing to life. Of all the horror films that I've seen Brad Dourif in, from the remake of Halloween to some of the garbage that is the Chucky films, this film gets obscured so much it physically hurts me. This is right after Chucky, but before Halloween. It's this wonderful median in the middle of what Brad Dourif brought. Watching him and Geroge C Scott in the same scene that I can't believe I'm saying this. This overpowers Geroge C Scott. These are two dudes that can bring a lot of power into their role. And for Brad Dourif still being on the up and up back then, where he was still getting his footing into some of the horror films, this is one of the greats. You can look at this scene with him and Geroge C Scott and completely forget where you are as you're watching two powerful actors bring everything into this movie. The thing that nabbed me for his character was how much the killer prided himself on being an artistically creative person, that he killed people out of art. And when he begins to change his voice into a female singer and then just goes, "I like plays." Everything has such a random segue, but because the killer is so random in the way that he talks about things, to just enjoy playing around with Kinderman, that moment right there, as short as it is one of the best moments I've ever seen in a horror film. And that's a hard list to get on for me. But with Brad Dourif being in the film, it does bring up a good point that I want to make, for the fact that with how much the actors are bringing their A game, it does make up for the lack of effects. When we look at the first Exorcist, everything was built on stunts. Everything was built on how the set was rigged, how they made everything so cold so you could see the breath coming out of Marin and Karis. And then, well, the Heretic used too much effects, and we got to lose that feeling of a realistic factor that was brought to it just by utilizing what was around the set. This film does the same thing, but with the addition of how they zoomed in on many parts of the film. Even though that can be like the death to some films, to zoom in so quickly, like it can almost be silly or over dramatic, but it's utilized in a very creative way here, that as if you're being hoisted into the film, whether you're going forward or backwards. So in the part of the film where the demon changes his face to look like the Gemini Killer, and we go from looking at Jason Miller to the zoom in of Brad Dourif's eyes, I'm losing my voice, and seeing the transition that we never saw him mold his face in the Gemini Killer, but just that moment of him screaming and Brad Dourif's insane angry eyes makes everything worth it. And another factor with what is considered the greatest horrific scene in this film that doesn't have many horrific moments is the death of the nurse. This has been talked about on many horror film moments where people felt like their heart stopped temporarily. Now, with the Exorcist film, I mean, you got a boatload of scares in the first film that people still haven't recovered from 1974 from. And the Heretic didn't do virtually any scares, but Exorcist 3 keeps you on the edge of your seat long enough to lull you into a false sense of security that you forgot you were watching a horror film, and then they nab you. This scene has been talked about where there is a night nurse that has been sprinkled into the film, and you see how caring and nice she is into a place that is essentially the den of madness, with it being a psychiatric facility. So there's a part where she's doing her nightly nurse duties, and things start to look a little weird, where she hears things drop. And she goes to investigate, as anyone would do. As much as you can get mad at a character for being like, you're dumb, you're walking into a mess, but The Exorcist knew how to play that game with kind of excusing the whole investigation to a small act, because you know something bad is going to happen. But with The Exorcist, you don't know what bad thing is going to happen. You don't know what curveball is going to be thrown at you. And with her being this essential thing of innocence in the same realm of Regan, it's like, okay, what's going to happen? So you see her walk around, do her nightly nurse things, and then you get a fake out where one of the patients is like, what are you doing here? Get out of my room. And she's like, I'm sorry, I don't know, sorry about that. And then she goes on her day, and then this thing with a fucking sheet just charges at her, and we don't see her death. Next thing you know, she's underneath a sheet, and she is pronounced dead. And she is given a bone-chilling description of how she died. Like, this thing goes into detail after detail after detail that makes you relieved you didn't see what else happened to her. That was impressive. That really does make everything full circle to go, okay, now we know we're in an Exorcist film. As much as that can be the death to some horror films, to wait for the scary things to happen, you're given a level of intrigue that makes you question, okay, I can stay or I can go. It's one of those types of films that knows how to use horror correctly, and who better than the guy who directed the first film? Making Exorcist 3 basically expunged the sequel that the original director did not sign off for. He did not have any interest in doing a sequel, but after The Heretic happened, he's like, crap, people are going to think that's the follow-up to The Exorcist, and I have to fix what wasn't broken. The one similarity, though, that I will give The Exorcist 3 that is honestly a compliment is utilizing the way the characters are faced with evil. When we're first introduced to Pazuzu in The Exorcist, after it's been laying dormant in Regan's body and then comes up, and now it's up to the two priests to save the day, and naturally this demon is going to do whatever it can to screw with the priests. In the first film, Pazuzu takes a jab at Father Karras' deceased mother, toying with the fact that he could not save his mother, or he wasn't there with her, and there was guilt light there, and Pazuzu was like, guilt, I can use that. Because that's what demons do. They mess with what's going on in your mental health. Anything that is going to cause a weakness, they'll take a jab at it to know, oh, I have an opening there. And it's the same thing here for Exorcist 3. When Kinderman is talking to patient X, that he knows and is his best friend, the man that he thought was dead for 15 years, and now Kinderman is staring at him right in the face and knows something's not right here. He knew that his best friend was dead. And from the demon's point of view, he was waiting for that. He was waiting for someone to come along that would also have guilt on their heart, knowing, oh, they feel for Karras. They're going to be easy to unwind. Because it's what demons do. They want to mess with your feelings. And knowing the fact that this is a double hitter. Pazuzu is possessing Father Karras, who is connected to Kinderman, and the fact that Kinderman has been on the case of the Gemini Killer. Everyone in that city knows the Gemini Killer's been dead for 15 years. So now he's bringing a familiar face that is going to bother Kinderman. It is a... Pazuzu was a dick, man. And that ultimately is one of the smartest things in The Exorcist, as well as the terrifying scene. But again, The Exorcist is all about facing evil. It's like what Jessica Lange once said in the Asylum season. If you stare at evil, evil's going to stare right back at you. But having that angle around Father Karras being possessed and he doesn't even know it's been going on for 15 years? That hits hard. Looking at his character, even though The Exorcist is about Regan, the iconic thing about The Exorcist is Regan. She's used in all of the posters, and it's hard to not imagine Regan as the first thing you think about when you hear the title The Exorcist. But Father Damien is the one that's the real intrigue. Everything surrounding The Exorcist is, can Father Karras bring his faith back to save a little girl from a demon's clutches? You have to be of sound of mind and have strong faith to be able to face evil and banish it. How can you do that if you have 1 foot in and 1 foot out? And that was Father Karras, watching him go to redemption and thus sacrifice his own life in the redemption of his faith to save a little girl from damnation. With the third film, knowing that this is what happened with the sacrifice, it's heavy, and we get a little bit more of his details. With Kinderman being the best friend of Father Karras and seeing how the past is talked about, despite never seeing any other flashbacks, all we see is a photo, but the way that Geroge C. Scott carries the character of Kinderman, I 100% buy they have a very close relationship. At the very end of The Exorcist, there's a weight of loss that we feel that Father Karras sacrificed his life to save a little girl. But what happened to the people in Father Karras' life? It's the same question we ask ourselves. If something happens to us, who will mourn for us? Who's going to carry on our legacy? What's going to happen? It's always a scary question to wonder, like, what's going to happen after you die, but then how someone is going to feel in remorse. I know what, if I depart the earth, God forbid, flailing myself onto a staircase with a demon inside me, no thank you, I don't want that outcome, but I know if something happens to me, there are people that are going to mourn for me and talk about me the way that Kinderman talks about Father Karras. So as I'm wrapping up this episode, I want to talk about 2 of my favorite scenes in this film. The first is honestly one of the funniest, even though it's not supposed to be funny. So I'm going to paint the scene for you. Once Kinderman has found out how the demon is getting out of the psych ward and killing the other priests, that demon is now in his home. And his family is like, what's going on here? Why is there some nurse here? Why did she faint at the doorstep and now she's just sitting there? What's going on here? And of course, he's deathly quiet because he knows he's looking at evil right in the face. He just got his answer. Protocol be damned. There's a game changer going on right now. And it's such a fast scene that it looks so comedic, but then again, the film does a pretty good job with the intensity for what they have to work with stunt-wise. And as the demon is lifting up these giant shears to go for the daughter's neck, everything happens so fast, but the way everyone reacts to it. And the reaction is both funny and realistic at the same time. The mother-in-law of Kinderman grabs Kinderman's daughter's hair and pulls her away, and the look of shock on her face is so funny, but at the same time, that's an honest reaction. If someone had pulled my hair before I realized what was about to happen to me, I'd have that same look on my face. But also, from like the way parents are, where when you see your child or your grandchild in danger, you just immediately react no matter what it is. That's an honest reaction of the grandmother just being like, get your ass over here, I'm gonna save you from whatever the hell's in this house. Like, that is pretty great. The mother-in-law does not do too much in that whole movie, except be a pain in Kinderman's ass, but she was prepared. And the second scene that I want to talk about is, I just have to say it, it's one of the greatest speeches I have ever seen in a possession movie. So I had to quickly look it up on IMDb because unfortunately, as great as it is, my brain did not have the capacity to be able to handle the amazingness of the speech. So here we go. This I believe in. I believe in death. I believe in disease. I believe in injustice and inhumanity, torture and anger and hate. I believe in murder. I believe in pain. I believe in cruelty and infidelity. I believe in slime and stink and every crawling putrid thing, every possible ugliness and corruption. You son of a bitch, I believe in you. Why do I find that powerful, you may ask? Well, when do you ever hear a speech where someone acknowledges the evil? They're usually saying, I don't believe in you, and I don't believe this happened, I'm gonna save the world, and you're gonna die. Blah, 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 blah. With the fact that Kinderman is an atheist character that has no faith in God, but knows enough about the ugliness in the world to say, I'm calling you out for your ugliness that you're providing this world. I see your ugliness every single day. I see murder. I see loved ones that are tragically lost to their families. Basically saying, I know that you exist in this world and I'm going to take you down. It is powerful. You can interpret that any way you want to. That is personally the way I see it, where it is something Kinderman would absolutely say. The writing is top-notch. General Patton put 110% into this movie, man. So one last thing that I want to say about this film, and I promise I will leave you... I will let this episode end. I like the angle that this film went to present characters in a certain profession and how they are dealing with the reality of evil. You have a doctor character, and then you have Kinderman being the police lieutenant that's in charge of everything. All he's ever known is protocol. There is an evil in the world. It's some person with a gun shooting someone else in broad daylight. However, the film opens up with a very gruesome death that has him wondering what's going on. He doesn't shrug it off to, oh, it's just evilness. He's aware there's evil, but even that is like, that's too much. Something's going on around here. He's willing to put in the time for the investigation to see what's going on no matter where it takes him. And the same thing goes for the doctor character. When I went to go rewatch the film, I saw that the marvelous and dearly missed Scott Wilson was playing the doctor who oversees a psychiatric hospital. And of all the doctor characters I've ever seen, both in TV and movies and books, I've never seen a character quite like his, except the reality of evil of what's going on here. There's a scene in the film where he is preparing to talk to Kinderman, and it threw me for a loop the first time that I didn't get that he was rehearsing the material. The man is so scared that what he found out has been going on is linked to the hospital in the most horrific ways. He has to rehearse it. No one ever prepares to say, I think there's evil in this hospital and I have proof now. He had to wait until the time was right to bring in the information. Most times in certain films or TV shows, when there's a doctor that's like, hey, I might know something, that's like, oh, that's just completely random. You didn't put any time and thought into making sure that this was evaluated correctly, and shit, that's a heavy thing. Looking at a character like him presented as a doctor facing evil, that's a tough thing. The way that he has to rehearse, we've had a patient here for 15 years and I think he might be your man. I even love the way that he looks at the photo of himself as, I wish I was ignorantly blissful again. I don't like having to sit with this information, as most of us. We wish we could go back and unwish to acknowledge something that exists, knowing there's no going back. Once you know evil exists in the world, your whole reality changes. I love the way that you have two characters in a high profession that are willing to acknowledge evil around there, and they have realistic approaches to coping with evil. And that is all I have to say about The Exorcist 3. If I don't stop, I will just keep going. I have to say, this has become one of my favorite horror films of the year. I have watched this film numerous times. I don't have to have a reason to watch this film, to be honest. It is so powerful that I'm glad that it's getting its recognition. But ironically, it was a film that had a lot of ties to it, being the sequel to The Exorcist that was corrected, as well as being Jeffrey Dahmer's favorite horror film. It was a very strange thing to have to, know about the the relevancy of this film, but then actually getting the chance to watch it, like, okay, I can see it as more than what it's known for. I see it for being a solid film. It really does not get enough credit. I can definitely agree with a lot of people that have seen the film that it is a truly remarkable film to see it as more than just a third installment. It was a fixed sequel to a sequel that broke something that wasn't broken to begin with, still following the coattails that you do feel, yep, this is an Exorcist film, and I like it. And that is officially a wrap on the Halloween series for 2023. This was really fun. I love the episodes that we got this year covering The Thing, Gravity Falls, The Lighthouse, and finishing off with Exorcist 3. This was good. This was a good set. I really enjoyed it. And thank you so much for being here for the spooky season episodes. Now is the time to get back to our regularly programmed Screen Queen episodes. Let's find out together what the next episode is going to be on the Screen Queen. So here we go. Let me get this mixed up really good. Okie dokie. Alright. Okay, I think that's mixed up enough. Let me reach in the bottom, see what we're working with here. What are you going to be? Are you shitting me? That's funny. Well, I mean, I'll take it for being associated with fall, so it's a good pick. Alright. So the next episode on the Screen Queen is going to be Over the Garden Wall. That is going to be fun. There we go. You know me, I love when we get an animated show on here. I can talk about that all day, so I'm going to save my voice so I can talk about that episode. If you'd like to catch up with me in between uploads, you can find me at my Instagram, at the Queen of the Screen. If you also want to talk about how you liked Exorcist 3 and it was just something that you didn't see coming, or if you want to see the funny movie-related content that I put up, you can find me on my TikTok at the Mystical Space Witch. And if you're interested in the book series that I wrote called Inglorious Inc., you can find that in the description box. Alrighty, you guys take care now, and happy Halloween. This is your Screen Queen, signing off.